One of the first physical turnoffs many women notice in men over 60 has surprisingly little to do with age itself. It has to do with vitality, or more specifically, the absence of it. And that's an important distinction because people often confuse getting older with becoming weaker, slower, and less engaged. But those are not the same thing. Can meet two men who are both 65 years old. One walks into a room with a sense of purpose. His posture is upright. His movements are deliberate. There's energy behind his actions. He appears present. The other man shuffles. His shoulders are rounded forward. He moves as though every task is a burden. The difference between them isn't primarily age. It's the signal they are sending about their relationship to life. Women are remarkably sensitive to these signals. From an evolutionary perspective, human beings have always been paying attention to signs of health, capability, and resilience. These perceptions operate largely beneath conscious awareness. A woman may not sit down and analyze a man's posture, gait, or level of physical energy in a rational way. She simply experiences a feeling. She feels drawn toward one person and less interested in another. Later, she may struggle to explain why. What she's often responding to is vitality. Vitality is not youth. That's where many older men make a serious mistake. They believe attraction is a competition with younger men. It isn't. Most mature women are not looking for a 25-year-old trapped inside a 65-year-old body. What they are looking for is evidence that a man remains actively engaged in his own existence. There's something deeply attractive about a person who still participates fully in life. Think about what happens psychologically when people stop challenging themselves. They become passive observers rather than active participants. They spend more time sitting than moving, more time complaining than building, more time remembering the past than creating a future. Eventually, that psychological withdrawal manifests physically. The body begins to communicate what the mind has accepted. The shoulders collapse. The stride shortens. The eyes lose their focus. The energy disappears. And the tragedy is that many men don't even notice it happening. Because the human body is not merely a biological structure. It is also a reflection of orientation toward life. How you stand reveals something about what you believe. How you move reveals something about your confidence. How much physical energy you bring into a room reveals whether you've decided that your best years are behind you or whether you're still engaged in the adventure of becoming. Women notice this immediately, not because they're judging harshly, but because human beings instinctively respond to energy. We are attracted to people who appear alive. We enjoy being around those who bring enthusiasm, curiosity, and movement into the world. The opposite tends to create emotional distance. This is why maintaining physical vitality becomes increasingly important as you age. Not because you're trying to look younger. That's the wrong goal. The goal is to remain capable, to remain strong enough to carry your responsibilities, to remain healthy enough to pursue meaningful experiences, to remain energetic enough to contribute to the lives of others. A man who walks daily, maintains his mobility, takes care of his strength, and moves with intention communicates something powerful without saying a word. He communicates that he still has a future, that he still values himself, that he still sees life as something worth participating in. And that message is profoundly attractive, because ultimately, women are not repelled by age. They are repelled by surrender. They are not turned off by gray hair or passing years. They are turned off when a man appears to have stopped investing in himself and stopped engaging with life. The body tells the truth long before words do. Move like a man who still has somewhere important to go, and the world will begin to see you differently. More importantly, you'll begin to see yourself differently. The second physical turnoff many women notice in men over 60 is something that is often dismissed as superficial, but in reality, it runs much deeper than appearance alone. It is poor grooming and personal maintenance. Now, it's important to understand what we're talking about here. This is not about chasing youth. It is not about expensive clothes, cosmetic procedures, or attempting to look 30 when you're 65. In fact, many women find that kind of desperation unattractive. What we're discussing is something far more fundamental. We're talking about the visible evidence of self-respect, because that's what grooming really is. When people think about attraction, they often focus on physical features they cannot control. They worry about wrinkles, thinning hair, age spots, or changes in facial structure. Yet, those things rarely determine whether someone makes a positive impression. What people notice far more quickly is how well someone cares for what they have. A man can have gray hair and still look distinguished. He can have wrinkles and still look confident. He can show every sign of aging and still appear attractive. But when grooming is neglected, a different message is communicated altogether. An unkempt beard, consistently wrinkled clothing, poor dental hygiene, neglected skin, body odor, or a general lack of attention to appearance sends a signal that extends beyond the physical. It raises a psychological question. If this man is no longer willing to take care of himself, what else has he stopped caring about? That's not necessarily a fair judgment, but human beings make these assessments constantly. Much of attraction operates through symbols. We rarely respond to facts alone. We respond to what those facts represent. A clean, well-maintained appearance often symbolizes discipline, self-awareness, and competence. Neglect often symbolizes resignation, indifference, or withdrawal. And that's particularly important as men get older. When you're young, people sometimes overlook a lack of grooming because youth itself creates a certain vitality. But as you age, the small details become more significant. They become indicators of how you navigate the responsibilities of life. Think about it this way. Imagine walking into a house that is clean, organized, and cared for. You immediately assume certain things about the person living there. Now imagine entering a house that has clearly been neglected for years. The condition of the environment tells a story before anyone speaks. The same principle applies to personal appearance. Your appearance is not simply decoration. It is part of the story you tell the world about yourself. And perhaps more importantly, it is the story you tell yourself. One of the most fascinating psychological realities is that behavior often shapes identity as much as identity shapes behavior. When a man takes the time to shave properly, maintain his clothes, care for his health, and present himself well, he isn't merely changing how others perceive him. He is reinforcing a belief that he matters. That may sound simple, but it is profound. Because self-neglect rarely begins on the outside. It usually starts internally. A man gradually stops believing he is worth the effort. He tells himself nobody notices anyway. He convinces himself that these details no longer matter. Over time, that attitude manifests physically, and women notice it. Not because they're looking for perfection. Most mature women are not searching for a flawless man. They understand aging. They are aging too. What they often find attractive is effort. Effort communicates investment. Investment communicates value. A well-groomed man says, without words, I still care. I still have standards. I still believe my life deserves attention. That's a powerful message. In many ways, grooming is an external expression of internal order. It reflects whether a person has maintained a relationship with himself that is based on responsibility rather than neglect. It demonstrates that he remains an active participant in his own life instead of a passive observer, drifting through it. And that distinction matters enormously, because attraction is rarely about perfection. It is about signals. It is about the countless small clues people use to determine how someone views themselves and their place in the world. Every morning, when you choose how you present yourself, you are making a statement. The question is whether that statement communicates resignation or respect. Take care of yourself, not because you're trying to impress others, but because the way you care for yourself reveals what you believe you're worth. And a man who values himself gives others a reason to value him as well. The third physical turnoff many women notice in men over 60 is excessive weight gain and the visible signs of health neglect. Now, this is a sensitive topic because modern culture often swings between two extremes. On one side, there's the unrealistic demand for physical perfection. On the other, there's the belief that physical condition doesn't matter at all. Neither position reflects reality. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Most mature women are not expecting a man in his 60s to have the physique he had at 25. That's not the standard. What many women are paying attention to is something far more meaningful, whether a man's physical condition reflects ongoing self-respect and personal responsibility. Because physical health is never purely physical. The body is a record of habits. It is a visible expression of thousands of choices accumulated over years and decades. The way you care for yourself today becomes the person you present to the world tomorrow. And while nobody controls every aspect of aging, everyone influences the direction in which they age. Women understand this intuitively. When they see a man who has allowed his health to deteriorate significantly, not because of unavoidable illness, but because of prolonged neglect. They are often responding to more than appearance. They're responding to what that appearance may symbolize. Again, attraction operates through meaning. A man who has completely abandoned his physical health may unintentionally communicate a lack of discipline, a lack of future orientation, or a lack of engagement with life. Whether that interpretation is entirely accurate is almost secondary. Human beings constantly use visible evidence to make judgments about invisible qualities. And perhaps nowhere is that more true than in relationships. Think about what physical fitness actually represents. At its deepest level, it is not about aesthetics. It is about capability. Can you move comfortably through the world? Can you handle challenges? Can you remain active, independent, and engaged? Can you participate fully in the experiences life offers? These questions matter because attraction is connected to competence. Not perfection, but competence. Throughout human history, people have been drawn toward individuals who appear capable of managing themselves and contributing positively to the lives around them. That principle doesn't disappear with age. In many ways, it becomes more important. A man who maintains reasonable physical health in his 60s is demonstrating something remarkable. He is showing that, despite the natural pressures of aging, he has continued to invest in himself. He has refused to surrender completely to comfort, passivity, or convenience. And that's admirable. One of the great dangers of later life is the temptation to gradually shrink your world. Physical discomfort leads to less movement. Less movement leads to reduced strength. Reduced strength leads to less confidence. Less confidence leads to further withdrawal. Before long, a cycle develops in which physical decline and psychological decline reinforce one another. The body weakens and the spirit follows. But the opposite is also true. Every walk you take, every healthy meal you choose, every effort to maintain strength, mobility, and endurance sends a message to yourself that your future still matters. Those actions are not merely biological, they are philosophical. They represent a decision to remain an active participant in life rather than a passive observer. Women often find this deeply attractive because it reflects a quality that extends far beyond physical appearance. It reflects self-leadership. It demonstrates that a man continues to take responsibility for himself despite the inevitable challenges that accompany aging. And responsibility is attractive. Not because it guarantees success, but because it signals reliability, stability, and maturity. The reality is that most people can immediately sense the difference between a man who is fighting for his health and a man who has given up on it. One radiates effort, the other radiates resignation. The physical differences may be noticeable, but the psychological differences are what truly shape attraction. That's why the goal should never be to look younger than you are. The goal is to become the strongest, healthiest, most capable version of the age you actually are. There's dignity in that pursuit. There's dignity in refusing to let comfort become your master. There's dignity in caring enough about your future to make difficult choices in the present. And there is tremendous power in understanding that every healthy action reinforces the belief that your life remains valuable. Because in the end, women are rarely evaluating your age. They're evaluating your relationship to your age. The number matters far less than the attitude. Take care of your body not because you're afraid of getting older, but because every act of health is a declaration that you are not finished becoming who you could still be. The fourth physical turnoff many women notice in men over 60 is perhaps the most important of all because it sits beneath everything we've discussed so far. It is not gray hair. It is not wrinkles. It is not even physical fitness. It is the appearance of defeat. And there is a profound difference between looking older and looking defeated. Age is inevitable. Defeat is psychological. You can see it in the way a person carries himself. You can see it in the shoulders that seem permanently pulled toward the ground. You can see it in the eyes that no longer look outward with curiosity, but downward with resignation. You can hear it in the tone of voice that suggests life has become something to endure rather than something to engage with. Women notice this almost immediately, not because they are consciously searching for it, but because human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional signals. Long before we analyze someone's words, we respond to their presence. We sense whether a person brings energy into a room or drains it. We sense whether they are oriented toward possibility or trapped in bitterness. And the body reveals that orientation. One of the greatest misconceptions about attraction is the belief that physical appearance exists independently from psychology. In reality, the two are deeply connected. Your internal world inevitably expresses itself through your external behavior. The attitudes you cultivate become visible over time. A man who spends years carrying resentment often develops the facial expressions of resentment. A man who constantly focuses on disappointment often adopts the posture of disappointment. A man who has quietly accepted the belief that his best years are behind him begins to move, as though the future no longer belongs to him. This is not merely metaphorical, it is observable reality. The body becomes a reflection of the stories we tell ourselves. Now, every person over 60 has experienced setbacks. Every person encountered loss, failure, heartbreak, regret, and disappointment. If you've lived long enough, life has wounded you in some way. That's unavoidable. The question is not whether life has challenged you. The question is what relationship you have developed with those challenges. Because there are two ways to grow older. You can allow life's hardships to harden you, or you can allow them to deepen you. Those are very different outcomes. A hardened person often becomes cynical. They expect disappointment. They view new opportunities with suspicion. Their body language reflects caution, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. A deepened person, on the other hand, may have suffered just as much, perhaps even more. But they have transformed suffering into wisdom rather than bitterness. Their experiences have given them perspective. Their struggles have strengthened their character. Their presence communicates resilience rather than resignation. And that distinction is incredibly attractive. Women are often drawn to men who have faced life's difficulties without being destroyed by them. There's something profoundly compelling about a person who can say, through his demeanor alone, I have encountered hardship, and yet I remain engaged with life. That communicates strength in its highest form, not the strength of youth, not the strength of physical dominance, the strength of endurance, the strength of character, the strength that emerges when a person continues moving forward despite disappointment. What's fascinating is that this quality often becomes more attractive with age, not less. Young people can be optimistic because they have not yet been tested, but a man in his 60s who remains hopeful, curious, and engaged has earned those qualities. They are no longer naive. They are the result of conscious choice, and women recognize that. They recognize the difference between a man who is merely surviving and a man who is still living. That difference appears in countless subtle ways. It appears in eye contact. It appears in posture. It appears in facial expressions. It appears in how someone speaks about the future. It appears in whether they approach new experiences with enthusiasm or avoidance. These signals communicate something deeper than attractiveness. They communicate whether a person remains psychologically alive, and perhaps that is the ultimate lesson. The greatest physical turnoff is not aging. It is abandoning the belief that growth is still possible, because when a man loses that belief, his body often reflects it. His movements become smaller, his energy diminishes, his presence weakens. The world begins to see what he has already started believing about himself. But the opposite is equally true. When a man chooses responsibility, vitality, self-respect, health, and purpose, those choices become visible. They shape his posture, his expression, his energy, and his presence. They transform not only how others perceive him, but how he experiences himself. In the end, the most attractive quality a man can possess is not youth. It is the refusal to surrender his spirit. Grow older if you must, but never allow yourself to become defeated, because a man who remains engaged with life will always possess something age can never take away.